All right, so welcome. So this is a fun panel. AES asked me to sort of have some fun with this for an hour. I'm John Storyk, Storyk Design Group, celebrating 50 years of designing studios. So, well, that just means I started young and didn't die. So you do have to do the work. And thus the title of what I just thought we could have some fun for an hour, which is, what might studio design look like 50 years from now? Okay? So, basically, kind of collected 5 people, one's missing in action. And here I was thinking Eddie would be late, but in fact it's Jimmy that's late. I apologize to Eddie. All friends of mine, full disclosure, these are people I've worked with and have remained friendly with, some very friendly with. So full disclosure there. I'm honored that they actually said yes. And so thank you. Okay. So many of them don't need any introduction in this environment, and maybe 1 or 2 do. Okay? And I thought about the order of how I'm going to introduce them. Okay, so we're going to, ladies first, Ann Mincieli, Jungle Studios, Alicia Keys, Grammy Award winner, engineer. No introduction needed for Annie. You all know who Annie is. Eddie Kramer. If you don't know who Eddie Kramer is, you just really shouldn't even be here. Hendrix, Zeppelin, Kiss, old friend, dear friend. We built Electric Lady together. And here with his wife, AJ, my daughter's godfather. And that's a whole other story, okay? And then Dave Rosenthal, new friend. This is Billy Joel's keyboardist and musical director, studio owner. Actually worked with Alicia and many other artists. Brilliant musician. Also a dear friend. We worked on his studio, so he's been in and out of studios many, many times. Owns his own studio. And maybe the wild card here is Steve Berkowitz, who I've actually known as long as almost everybody else here. And maybe that's not a name that hangs out in the AES. And Steve managed the Cars years ago and introduced me to Rick. By the way, Rick, rest in peace, of course. And we built his studio. And Steve has a long career as a producer and an engineer and a user of studios, record company executive, and brings a kind of a non-technical flavor. We have 2 very serious engineers here, artist engineer and producer exec. Straggling in late is going to be Jimmy Douglas. You'll all know him when he comes in, because he'll be Jimmy Douglas and we don't have to introduce him. Okay, so that's who's going to be answering 2 questions that I'm going to ask. But I figured just to get us started, basically the questions that I'm going to ask this panel are very simple. The one question is, what are these studios going to look like in 50 years? Okay, and I thought an easy way to get everybody to answer this question was to maybe think about what hasn't changed in the last 50 years. I think about that all the time, okay? And maybe if we subtracted that from the universe of possibilities, we might get to an answer of what things might look like in 50 years. I got a few slides that maybe could get us going, including our panelists. Let me show them to you, okay? So, you know, recording is not that old. You can't have recording studios without recording. So, we've had acoustics. Jimmy, okay. Okay, and here, see, Jimmy, I thought Eddie would be late. And I'm going to catch a lot of crap for that for the next 5 years. Jimmy Douglas, I don't have to tell you who he is. Okay, thank you. Okay, he was on another panel, so he's got some excuse. And Jimmy and Eddie and Annie have been involved in studios that I've worked on, or I've been involved in studios that they've worked on. And of course, Steve Berkowitz introduced me to Rick to do his studio, and I've worked with Dave. So I've touched all this. Anyway, this is to remind us that this is relatively new in the history of man. I mean, without recording, there's no reason to have a recording studio. So let's just flash forward and start seeing where this is all coming from. So I figured I might go back 70 years, and this is kind of the world that we were in. Okay, and let's just start going back 50 years and take a quick look at where these rooms are. Okay, this is the Moscow Symphony Orchestra Studio, actually a great room. Still there, but not being used, sadly enough. Okay, And this is just a teaser. This is not a history course. Just trying to get us thinking about where we've come from. And then, of course, I don't have to tell you what this is. This is where my life started. And certain parts of Electric Lady haven't changed. Okay? Mainly the live room. It basically hasn't changed all these years. It's worked then. I was very lucky, I would have to say, to be honest. And so luck is encouraged. Make your first project famous. That's my career tip. Okay? We have commercial studios. So now, where have we gone? Where are we now? We have thousands of amazing rooms. Okay? Let's just quickly take a look at them and see where we are now. Okay, they're amazing to be in. They sound incredible. The equipment is 1/10 the price of what it used to be. Okay, we've officially, for many years, entered the age of personalized or project studios. Little did I know in 1969 that I was dropped into that world since I had no reference. I just assumed that was the norm. Of course, it wasn't. Now it is the norm. Okay, this is Paul Epworth's studio. This is Annie's studio. Still one of the best in the world. Thank you, Annie, for even allowing us to play in that sandbox. It was an honor. That's Jungle Studios. And they come in all shapes and sizes. Churches have studios. Some people buy churches that are going out of business. Okay? I'm just getting us thinking. Now, private artists, of course, we've been in the era of private artist studios for a long time. And this does not necessarily mean small studios. Some private artists are building big studios. Some people call them vanity studios, project studios, private studios, destination studios. You can call them whatever you want. They're still studios. And they still have to sound good. And they do sound good. So that's Alicia's one of her first studios, which of course became a lot of what was learned there by Annie and myself then became the fruits of our decision making at Jungle. Okay? And this was actually for Green Day Studio, and Jay-Z's studio, and Jimmy Douglas. I promised to get one up there, allowed me to play with Timbaland. Thank you, Jimmy. Schools have studios, some of them are extraordinary, and the schools are doing a good job in turning out our next generation of engineers. This is Berkeley. The broadcast industry, basically there's not a radio station being built that basically is now not a recording studio. And if they're not a recording studio, they're a podcast studio, okay, and that's a whole nother conversation. And of course, homes. We have thousands and thousands of home studios. This is a studio, okay? And some of them are extraordinary. And they come in all shapes, sizes, flavors, okay? Budgets. Just plow through them. Some are more spectacular than others. Some of them are in garages, so they get to be called Paradise Garage. Okay? Cynthia Daniels' studio out in the East End of Long Island. Okay? Some sort of don't even look like studios anymore. And then we enter the world of immersive or surround, and that's, of course, the 500-pound gorilla that's been floating around our show for a long time. One way or another, this is here to stay. I would be very interested to hear what our panelists say about that. It's been a little slow to arrive, but it is not going to go away. I'm pretty convinced it's not going to go away. It's here to stay, and that's going to come in all shapes and sizes, and we'll let the big guys duke out the format wars. But we'll let the engineers and the people who have to make studios figure out how to deal with this, okay? And they come in all shapes and sizes, okay? And this is BSL studio in Vienna. I think this is state-of-the-art right now, to be honest. So just a few more slides to make sure our panelists stretch a little bit today and beyond. We can put speakers in glass walls now. I think someday the glass will be the speakers. That'll be kind of cool. And lighting and atmosphere is here to stay. There's a log cabin studio. They got a studio in a trailer and an Airstream on the second floor of a building in a girls' school, teaching them how to be broadcast engineers. This is one of my favorite little studios. And then they're going to start stretching, and they may start looking like shops. Okay? And they may start looking like this, or even this, or even this. And it's going to get crazier and crazier, but maybe not. Maybe it's just going to be this. Or maybe it's just going to be this. Okay. So this was really not for your entertainment, but was to guarantee that my panelists, who are really, really busy, everybody up here is working. These guys are really, really busy. They're the best in our industry. So I'm going to ask them, in whatever order they want to dive in whatever way they want to dive in, to talk about where we're going to be in 50 years, and you could talk about what's not going to change, or what should change, or what you think will change. Ladies first.
I would love to dive into this. I think I opened Jungle when everyone told me that I was crazy, the industry was dead, and if you study the analytics 10 years later, the labels found ways to make revenue streams. They're finding ways to get ahead of streaming. And all of that plays into what I do with my studio. I think in 50 years from now, studios, it's coming around from what we did 30 years ago. Labels are buying spaces, labels are going back to what we did in the 60s, way before I was born. So going back to owning studios again, so getting people out of the bedrooms and building rooms. So yes, we have home studios that artists come into commercial studios, they love what they see and they want to design facilities and versions of studios in their house or in a private area, but I think content is king, and the multifunctional incubator where labels are doing everything under one roof. So some of the rooms that we've been seeing, the trend has been like a grid in the ceiling, a green screen curtain, content, video content, how do the labels design their website, social media content, they're driving, how do they convert social media followers to customers. So studios aren't going anywhere. In my own studio, I do everything from streaming Beats 1 to 110 countries for the last 5 years, to Jennifer Lopez full-blown movie shoots, to destination sessions from Depeche Mode and people flying in from out of town, which is great because we all know we get the local clients in New York, but to actually be a destination studio is really important. So in 50 years from now, yeah, some of the gear will change, some won't, because we're still using gear that we used. I have a 1937 guitar amp that I still use, an EH-150. I still have a 1939 Ludwig snare drum. Some of those things are not going to change. We still need musicians. Artists still need to make music in bedrooms. The theory of people making a beat in their bedroom and working in their bedroom means they're not interfacing with the rest of the industry that they work in. So I do panels like this all the time, and I encourage people to get in a studio and work in a studio. Studio is going to be, my studio in 50 years will be an updated version of what it is right now.
Dave?
Well,
I'll put you on the spot.
Sure, I'm good. I share a lot of those same thoughts, and I think about studios 50 years from now. One thing I think will be a constant, and that is John will still be designing rooms, probably. He'll be celebrating his 100th year. And, there's a lot of things that have changed, and a lot of things that will continue to change. One thing that is always a constant is the need to collaborate with our fellow musicians. And as sophisticated as all the equipment gets, there's still that need to do that. And I think nowadays there's, we have FaceTime and other things like that to collaborate for people from place to place, but it's very much a two-dimensional experience. And I think the future will through advents in VR, will enable us to actually feel like we're in the room, not just feel the presence of another person, but to hear the music the same way that they're hearing it, to share the sort of same space, even though you're in different places, possibly different countries, maybe even different continents, and be able to collaborate together. How to do that? I don't know. Maybe the beginnings of it are happening now. Maybe it's still 15, 20 years away. And but people will look back at us now and think of and laugh about how primitive FaceTime was. As cool as it is for us today. A lot of the things that are tough to imagine come from it's really like vintage recording and futuristic recording. Well, when you look back on what was old school, the old school may not have even arrived yet for what will be happening 50 years from now. If you would have asked people in the 1880s what invention they would like to see, they would have asked for a faster horse. Who could imagine even a car? It was inconceivable. So I think a lot of the things that are still to come, we can't even conceive of now. And that's going to be exciting to see where it all goes. I think the convenience of all the all of the devices that we used way back in the day and all through the years getting smaller and smaller and more compact, easier to use and to get around. That's really exciting. Where will that all lead to? Hopefully it'll get simpler and simpler. Maybe one day get to the point where we can even have thoughts in our heads. We all hear music in our heads. Wouldn't it be cool if we could actually get that music that we hear in our heads right out and record it?
Dave, I liked what Annie said about some of her equipment. You have a studio in your home. It's not a commercial studio, but you record outside artists. You also work on your own projects, both preparing for your concerts and producing, etc. Do you have things and items and systems in your studio that are 50 years old?
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing like tube equipment, tube microphones, tube mic pre's, all those things. And these are things I don't think that they're going to go away.
I don't think so either.
I mean, they have an amazing sound, and they sound as good as they did the day they were brand new, or sometimes in some cases even better.
You agree with Annie?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Steve, I'm going to ask, Steve, I think of everybody up here is going to come from a slightly different perspective. I would say it's safe to say, Steve, you're not an engineer, a working engineer?
I've twiddled some knobs, but no, certainly nothing
You're
like
on a panel with 3 world-class engineers and a pretty good engineer artist.
That's
but
right.
You come from a different zone here, but I'm going to throw you into the deep end right away here.
I'm a shepherd. My job in life, because I couldn't do anything else, I didn't have a choice other than to be in music.
But Steve's bio, I was reading Steve's bio, record producer and executive, but also NCAA basketball ref?
Yeah.
What's that about?
Well, and when I decided not to be a musician and went back to college, I was lucky enough to study with Max Roach for a few years. I did music all day long, and I got about as big as I am now and knew I had to run around. And being a guy from Boston, no offense to you, morning Yankee fans, I knew I had to.
It's a tough day for Yankee fans right now.
So I became a referee, again, as a guy in the middle, hopefully that the whole procedure would go well for the reason of the beauty of basketball, and the same with the recordings. I'll just say, because I'm proud of it, you ask about old gear. I was the head of A&R at Sony after Sony had merged with BMG RCA, and the company called me one day and said, "We're closing the studio." So this is the CBS studio, the RCA studios, 2 of the greatest studios that there ever were, that set the standard for many other studios. And I said, "Well, you can't close the studio." He said, "Why?" I said, what is the corporation worth if you do not have access to your assets?
Right.
We don't want a studio. And I said, well, I pointed at the phone and I went, well, I don't want to pay them either, but we need a phone and we need a studio. Mark Wilder, who's somewhere in this building, who's a great mastering engineer at Sony now, and at the studio that's called Battery. He and I walked around with a clipboard and we said, okay, so this 4-track, these 2 8-tracks, how many of these Mitsubishi 36s should we keep? And the Pultex. We have the greatest collection of old gear because we have to be able to play mono and 2 and 4 and 3 and 8 and 12 and all the gamut. As a matter of fact, yesterday the guy called me and said, well, it's an 8-track tape, but there's only 4 tracks on it. What should I do? I'm converting a bunch of older Leonard Cohen material at the moment. So I get to work with this stuff, and there are still people who do this all the time. When you asked me to do this, and thank you for asking, John, and a pleasure to be with you guys on this panel, and everybody who came today. We're blessed to be able to sit here and talk about this idea rather than other things that are happening in the world. So we're blessed by this. And at the end, there's great music, so extra good. My head goes between making and creating music, producing music, archiving music, split. Then there's the sale and the distribution, and they're really different. And there's no doubt in my mind that my number one most important thing is to make the music sound like what it was intended to and let it come to full fruition. Usually you do that in a collaboration, unless you're 1 or 2 musicians who can do this on their own. As a non-engineer, it's important for me, with whether it's Steve Adabo, who I work with a lot at Shelter, or Mark Wilder, or Greg Calby, I'm a guy who thinks, what does it feel like? What should it sound like? What did they mean by this record? What was it supposed to feel like? And to be able to gather together in a studio with people, especially I work with Adabo so much now, and literally as an ex-musician I'll go, bass is too floppy in the middle and the way at the bottom of his voice, you got to do something about that. It's a pleasure for me to collaborate with people whose brain goes, yeah, I got to get this in the cue, take this and that, so that I can stay on the subject matter. So I don't think the studios will go away because the animals have to come to the watering hole where there's food and sex and music, because that's what our bodies do, and that's what they're always going to do. So that thing won't ever change. The trajectory of our hormones is not going to go away, and that's very creative. No, I mean it completely seriously, and it's the reason that we do this.
This is being recorded, but, you know.
This is being recorded?
It is actually being recorded.
My wife would agree. So,
I like the sex part.
come on, it's the reason half of us are in this room. Or all of us.
I get a big argument here from anybody.
I want to hold your hand, John. That's all I want to say is that the animals will come together. It's great to collaborate and to go to places that you trust. Yeah. That is important. When I sit with Greg Calby in his room, that music sounds exactly like what it sounds like. And that's rare. That's not often that it sounds and feels exactly like what it is. Most rooms don't. Long gone, though not too far, the day that you'd hurry up, make the mix, take the cassette, and go sit in the car. Does it really sound like this? So, studios will exist. We have no idea what it will be like. Because 20 years ago, if we said streaming, we'd be thinking about fishing. We wouldn't be thinking about where the music goes now. But I just don't think the human condition and need will change so drastically that it'll take us away from collaboration in spaces that are great to do that in.
But it is interesting, and that's why I threw up those slides. I carefully tried to choose some slides that had some chronology to it. And on many levels, many levels, studios, not the business, and not the delivery, and certainly not the music, but the place where you make and mix, create and post-produce. Let's make the words bigger. Many things have not changed. Some things have changed, but more hasn't changed than has changed. Jimmy, chime in here. And I know you have a studio. I've been in your studio. You work a little differently. You do a lot of work by yourself in your studio. You do a lot of remixing. What do you think, my friend?
Well, I should say, you know, especially in the hip-hop world where I live and all that stuff, I mean, technology has allowed people to make this music without having to be in the studio. But what doesn't go away, and I've seen the whole chronology of it, is they want to come to a big studio because they want to like be able to just hang out with their friends and share that music and just get wild.
It's the watering trough.
That's the watering trough. But so one of the things that I've always thought way back in the day when I was a wee one, I was always thinking studios I always wanted, because I thought I was a performer as a engineer, mixer, I always thought I was a performer. I would do it like a performance. And I always wanted to have an audience when I was performing. So I'm hoping and thinking that with the same thing I just described, what you want to do instead of, or you know, being alone doing this stuff, you want to have an audience there, and the studio becomes part. In other words, the future would be like not just a live thing. You can actually go to the studio and see your favorite artists create their product, and that could be something in the future. In 50 years, it would probably be the extension of a live performance. I don't know. I think that's what the kind of studio I'd like to see. The one I saw in the past when it didn't exist was I was like, okay, so you could have the drums with like glass baffles because they didn't have them then, but of course they got them now.
We got them now.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it's easier to say now. And then there was that, and I was thinking, oh yeah, and then there'd be a big glass window, and they'd like this audience would be sitting there, like the doctors in the hospital when they do those operations, and everybody watches from the thing. That was my concept of what would be really nice, and I'm just hoping maybe the studios will look like that. Other than that, you know, we have technology where like all the things you showed us are true. There's homes, there's studios. record companies are now doing what they used to do.
They're all
Came into it, which is like Atlantic
There are a
Records.
few companies that say they're not record companies, but they really are record companies.
Right, the record company, and they're doing what, when I met you, Atlantic Studios, there I was, and there you came in, and we were there, and the record company owned all of us, and it was like they could also basically not do greater deals with people because they could offer them studio time, That's kind of what, that was kind of like, I would be like, hey, we're not going to give you this money for your contract, but you can use the studio for a year. And it was a big deal. That, it's not such a big come on now, because everybody has a laptop, and everybody has plugins, and so on and so forth, but it's kind of setting itself for the same model. And that's kind of how I see the future of the studio, hopefully.
Well, I don't know if we saved the best for last, but we saved the oldest for last. That's for sure. Sorry.
It's a cold.
This is a long-standing battle between Eddie and I. So we're cemented to each other because without Eddie, I don't have any presence in this universe at all. I was hired to do a club for Jimi, and I did the club. That's a whole crazy story. And at the last minute, Eddie talked Jimi out of doing the club, converting it to a studio. So I watched my first commission at the age of 22 disappear as fast as it arrived, and I wanted to strangle this guy. I can remember that night as if it was yesterday, and they said, no, you can stay and do the studio, at which point I pointed out to them that I had actually never been in a studio. They said, no, if you can figure it out and learn and get some help and whatever, and the rest is a whole other story. We became lifetime friends. So you've been in a lot of studios. You've built them. You've torn them apart. You've yelled and screamed at a lot of studio owners, I'm told. You're a little bit fussy. Where are we going? Where are you going? Where are we going?
Well, I think the word is immersive. I've been fascinated ever since I've been aware of the immersive audio. I think, and this is purely conjecture as we are thinking in terms of the future, I'm wondering, is it possible, and I feel it might be, that if we create a space, this new studio, whatever it's going to be, well, we need a room, and it's got to sound great, but what would happen if we could immediately put all of you, an audience of hundreds or thousands, into this immersive reception? It's some kind of a headphone that's 5.1 or 7.1 or 22.1, whatever it is, some kind of device that you put on, and you can see it on a screen, and you're part of what we're creating. In other words, everybody can kind of like witness. You just said that about bringing the audience. And I'm just wondering, is there something in our future that will actually allow us to do that? There's nothing like being in, being in a room full of musicians who are creating, and the vibe is cool. And that word vibe is so critical. You feel it when you walk into Electric Lady or your studio or wherever, and the musicians are playing, and there's something inherently wonderful going on, and you want to capture that moment. And it's the most, that's what we live for, is that wonderful creative moment where it all clicks, all gets together, and there's that fabulous take, and you go, wow, what was that? Now, what would happen if we could all feel that at the same time? That's what's been running around in my head since you proposed this panel. Yeah, let's hang out and be part of the process. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Well, it might start a whole other conversation. I don't have to ask you if you use equipment that's 50 years old. I think that's...
I am part of that equipment.
Actually, you are part of that.
Yeah. I feel like if I touch a Pultec, I can feel every wire inside it, yeah. But yes, using vintage equipment is part of what I do, plus all the plugins as well. I mean, my world is a hybrid world of, using the best of analog and the best of digital, so I like the way that I can integrate the two. I can do things now on a Hendrix 5.1 surround mix, which I could never do. I just did this recently at the Capitol, and I'm looking at the Dolby Atmos ceiling above me. I'm thinking, wow, that's my next step. If Jimi had been alive, he would have been all over it.
So disclosure, Eddie just, of course, remixed the 50-year Electric Ladyland, and of course had a really difficult task, because in that case, there's the stems, there's Eddie, but we're missing the artist. And I knew Jimi only slightly. Of course, Eddie knew him very well. Jimi would have loved this. I mean, he would have loved. He
embraced it. Yeah, because he loved the technology.
So you had a hell of a responsibility to figure out what he would have done. And Steve, you've had that responsibility sometimes, right?
Yeah, I had a job a couple of years ago, which was a wonderful job, where Apple Records asked me to come to Abbey Road and remaster all the Beatles mono albums in mono for vinyl. The tapes are in great shape. I'm happy to say they're kept like the crown jewels as they should be, except
not at Universal, I assume.
No, they're kept in an undisclosed location.
Oh, undisclosed.
I mean, it was amazing to all of a sudden walk in and have a box put in my lap, and it's like with the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper, and oh, look, it's the Mona Lisa. Oh, look, it's another one. But the fact of the matter is that the machines that they were recorded on are unsafe to use at this point because there's no weight, there's no safeties. The power is different. The cutting lathe is different. They said, what's different? I'm in the room, I'm going, there's 2 speakers in here.
Yeah.
When these were cut, and we did cut them in the exact same room at Abbey Road, but there was a dozen places where it could go sideways. So the other thing is, you have these tapes, which are 50 years old. How are the tapes? What are you playing them on? What is your intention?
We were lucky, those tapes, you can play them today. Anything from like 67 to like 72, I can play them today, they track beautifully, there's no problem. Anything after that, no problem.
The Abbey Road people didn't like it that I was there because I was American, seriously. And the first thing I said was, I'd like to work with power chords today. Could you get me like every power chord in the building? And we're gonna put a tape up and we're gonna capture it 9624 and we're gonna see what the power, and they go, this yank is nuts. I do have to say, Michael Brower and Greg Calby got me into this thing about the power chords, and some of you may think this is crazy, except we got down to 3 or 4 chords, and I kept doing blind listening tests back with several of the Abbey Road engineers, and they were absolutely different than one another. Wow. And the only intention that day was, how do I do what they did 50 years ago and make it come out the same? Which sounds easy, but since the practice is, you can't do something completely different and have it be the same. You can't. Doesn't work. But we managed, and the only goal was to use technology to make it sound exactly the way that it did, while having an analog chain all the way throughout, which we did. So, yeah, it's really hard, but worth it. When they said, do you want to do this job, what will you do? And go, what do you do to records that change the world? You do nothing other than do what they did. No one has a better idea than what the Beatles did on those first 9 albums. So the only thing to do, and very complex for you, because what would you do? And you were there. I wasn't with the Beatles. You were with Jimi. What a wild gig. That, you should have, did you film this? Yeah, that's the film. What do I do that I didn't do 50 years ago that I...
Well, that prompts an interesting question. I'm going to throw out one more question to my panelists, which I wrote them, but they probably didn't read it, and then I'm going to open it up, because it's unusual to get these 5 people on the same stage here. It's not that easy. Actually, it turned out to be easy, but it's an honor. So, you're all working now, today. You're all working in studios. In some instances, you're working in your studios, which are highly tailored to your needs. Eddie works in a number of different studios. Doesn't really have your own studio. You sort of have your favorite studio. And Steve is never working in the studio. You are working in other studios. What would you do differently now? What should go away? You've been talking about stuff that's here 50 years. What should not happen that's happening now? What one thing should disappear from how...
MP3?
Well, I guess you're going to shift to the delivery side. I don't mind if that's how you want to discuss it, but let's try to think about studios and the production side, the creation side, if we can. What should we get away from?
I think you touched on something earlier about speakers being in glass panels, and speakers taking up less physical space in a room would be a nice thing if there eventually is a way to accomplish that big sound that you can get nowadays. But maybe
Andy's been ahead of the curve on that. We figured that out a long time ago. Yeah. Anybody? What do you think, Eddie? What should we throw away? What don't you want to see when you go to a studio?
Me personally, I want people to stop using the technology so much.
Yeah.
I want people, like when Alicia asks the guitarist to come in these days, I use tape. I've been around since 1990. I've been through all the things, twists and turns. I've locked 3348s 3 at a time, Mariah Carey, all of that stuff. So Pro Tools is easy to me. What I would like to go away is some of the technology. There's a artists that make records and they don't even meet the people that are making the records with them. The drum programmer is 3,000 miles away. The guitar player copies and pastes 8 bars. When me and Alicia work, even though we're using the technology, she's making the session musician play from top to bottom, and he'll stop after the first hook and say, oh, why don't you just copy and paste the first hook over to the second hook?
Oof.
And that's the part of the problem that should go away, is these bad practices of, there's a reason why Alicia's asking you to play the hook, because we don't want the same part played the same way for the second hook, third hook. The human element and the human feel of the tempo drifting suddenly up and down, even though you're playing on a click. First of all, musicians that come in today and say they need to hear a click, I think that's bullshit, because no one played on a click years ago. Why do you need to hear a click so loud for time and feel? You're supposed to count and know that by playing with a drummer or playing in a band. So a lot of times I wish the technology, people would lighten up on the technology. You know, everything, there's a reason why a vibe was created. When people get in a room together, that's where the magic happens. When you make a guitar player and piano player and a drummer all sit in a room together, that's how a song is born. And a lot of that went away, and it needs to happen again to spark some of the new ways we can capitalize on making music. You know, people make drum tracks now, they don't even use a drum machine. They're going on the grid and copying and pasting right on Pro Tools bar 1, beat 1. We don't program like that. There's ways to program where you can quantize and use the grid and make it feel human. Loop an 8 or 16 bar loop. So
Why not just play the drums?
well, yeah, that too. And we do, and we a lot of Alicia's music is live drums over program drums, but I wish auto-tune would go away because people are using it in the wrong way.
Jimmy, what do you think?
I hate to be the devil's advocate, but yeah, I was there when we did all that stuff, and even when I was doing it, like something happened that way back in the day, they started sending their tapes away, and they were doing vocals in another state than in Florida, and they were doing things here and there, and I was like, why you got, they were never in the room together. And those records are great, and I don't think it really matters how you get there. I don't care if you put a drum on a grid, if the technology is available and you use it. Look, that stuff's making millions of dollars. You're talking about the resurgence? That resurgence that you're hearing is everything that you're saying that you wish would go away. I mean, what do you think hip-hop is? What do you think that whole world is? They don't play anything. They don't even know what playing is. And I'm just saying, having the tolerance to let music grow, and it's really paying all of us right now. Without hip-hop, I'm not saying hip-hop is the shit, but it's like, it's driving the marketplace. And it gave it all fresh life, so it's like, you want it to go away, then that music goes away. And those people, whatever they're feeling, the same way you were feeling what you were feeling, and you were entitled to that, they're entitled to that as well.
Yeah, okay.
So that's, I don't know, I'm just kind of like,
I'm not wishing that it goes away. I'm just looking at the technology and the twists and turns and acknowledging, you know, all the different ways.
And also to the same angle, when I'm producing records for me with all the funk bands that I was doing, the first thing I started doing was trying to figure out a way not to have everybody play at the same time, because it took forever. So I'd be down to, how about just the drummer play and just the bass player play? And then I'll overdub everybody, which is really the same concept. Like, nobody was playing together, even back then for me. Even in the 80s, all those English bands that I was doing, it was just done, it was a different process, is what I'm trying to say. And you know, into the I totally get it. I listen to older records and I go, why was it I could listen to a record for 6 minutes back then, and I can't now? Well, you're right, technology makes it so I can just fast forward, I don't want to hear the rest of it. But also, for the ear, this is my own theory, the ear and the mind, it picks up every nuance. Like when you listen to those older records, they played and sang every hook, because we were doing it, we do vocals. We have to sing the whole freaking song, which I loved it. I loved having 4 guys on a mic and doing vocals. I loved it. It was fun. And creative. So now, like you said, somebody will do, well, one person will do 5 parts, and they'll do the first whatever hook or whatever, and then they fly it. So here's what I see your brain when you listen to that. Your brain goes the first time, it goes, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's cool. Okay, I got it. And the next time it goes, I've heard that before. And the next time it goes, I've heard that before. Even if you have one variation, the mind knows it's different, so it's able to sit and basically, sustain the time to consume all this different information that's entering. A guitar playing a lick, if it's not flowing, it's like slightly off, And the other thing I want to say that I found interesting, because I've been living in a world where they're quantizing everything with those damn clicks or whatever you call it, when I hear the older records, I can hear the time that's off, and I can hear the tuning that's off. The new tuning, I'm like going, it's all we had, and we love them. And for our experience, it worked fine. But now, I've gotten used to hearing the newer stuff, and I'm sorry, I'm not saying don't get me, the vibe still wins. I'm not going all the way to the side. But I'm saying, I can understand when I hear it, because like younger people hear some of those records, they go, it's out of tune. I'm going, who cares? But they care because they're being fed every day, perfectly tuned and perfectly in time stuff. And when you suddenly hear some of those older records, you go, oh, and you start from the beginning, you put it in the beginning, you go, whoa, that thing is really a lot faster. So I'm just saying, I don't know.
There's 2 sides to the story here. Huh? There's 2 sides to the story.
Yeah, and one of them is like, it's paying us.
I got it. Be careful. Eddie, you have to work in a lot of studios. For the moment, disregard budget, disregard location, if you can. How are you choosing the studio you want to work in? Familiarity, certain equipment? You've been known to be demanding on studio owners. I know this from personal fact, arguably with reason. What are you demanding when you go in?
Well, for Capital, it's great for what I'm doing now with the 5.1.
Because of the
Studio C's got this room that's dialed in, but that console it's a great board. It's an 88R, but it's getting towards the end of its life, and shit doesn't work all the time. And that's a problem. And it's a problem with these consoles. Unless you've got the money to buy a brand new one, God bless you, that's terrific. But here's a place like Capitol Records, they're constantly on the maintenance of that board. The one in A is perfect, it's a brand new one, it's fine. But, I like a room that's got tons of Apple gear and a great assistant engineer who I can work with. And a room that when I'm mixing it, we all want the same thing, put the faders up, does it sound good, does it translate out of here? I'm happy, That's what I look for. And it could be any studio that fills that same demand.
Take a pause just for a quick minute, because we're going to run, they're going to throw us out of here pretty sharp for some reason. Does anybody want to throw a question out?
Does the modern studio have a board in it?
This is a moment. If anybody does, you got to jump up and...
I said, does the modern studio have a board in it? I was just...
Yeah.
Yes, it does or doesn't. The modern studio that John was asking us about, does it have a board for any of you?
Yes.
It does have a board, okay.
Yeah.
50 years later, I'm saying. That's
I think we'd have to have something.
Okay. Jimmy, does your studio have a console?
Huh?
Do you have a console?
I got rid of my console.
I got rid of it.
In my B room, I have a little guy, but I got rid of it. Yeah. For the reason he just said. He just said the reason why.
Right. And Dave, does your studio have a console?
It does, but I hardly use it. I work mostly in the box because I favor recallability over I try to capture the best quality sound on the way in, use the good mics, good pre's, good signal path, and accurately capture it. But once it's actually been recorded, I prefer to have the recallability and sacrifice
that console is a volume knob, basically, and a coffee holder.
Yeah.
And Annie's might be a little different, your answer.
I do. In my main room, I have an EMI console from our friend in Brazil, and I have an SSL 48 input duality, and then I do have phonics. Yeah. Most
artists want to use it. They want to come in through the console.
Yeah, because we're doing lots of long-ended tracking sessions. We're getting album projects in. Right now, I have one artist in 4 rooms, so on the way into Pro Tools, we're still using a lot of the mic pre's and gear.
So my only personal conclusion, and then we'll jump to a question, is that we are currently living in a world with at least 3 or 4 different system paradigms, all quite comfortably. At least 2 different positions on click tracks versus.
But this is a great thing, because who would want one type of music either?
Exactly.
You want different genres. You want all the
we all agree that content is king. We all agree that at the end of the day, all that counts is the music. Okay, and we all agree that lots of stuff from 50 and 70 years ago, not only is it still here, but we don't even want it to go away. So those are the cliff notes. You got a question so far?
Yeah, just to extend on that.
We could have just gone to the cliff notes. No.
It was mentioned bringing spectators in, like in the operating room.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
So how much might something like that, first question, affect the the creative process and people sort of knowing they're being watched by strangers, maybe take them out of their comfort zone? And then the other thing, to start to do that is it sort of blends into being a live venue. So is there going to be a clear separation between going to the studio and performing live in 50 years?
Well, for me, that was my thought. I think artists thrive on having people give them their accolades while they're doing shit.
Should it cost $300 to go to a hockey game? I'd pay a couple $100 to sit in one of your sessions
in a heartbeat,
and then that one moment be able to be in the presence of the artist and the recording. It's once in a lifetime, I think.
I think it's pretty safe to say that all of this can and will exist. I've been in a lot of studios. I'm not a mixing engineer. I've been in studios. I've gone down to visit Electric Lady where Lee can't even get into the room. I've gone up to Jungle on occasion where you can't even get into your own room because the artist has rented that room and it is their room. They are not interested in anybody. They demand privacy. They demand excellence. On the other hand, KEXP in Seattle does 600 recordings a year, of which 95% of them have audience viewing, because that's their model. And when you go there, and they make amazing recordings, it could be the most successful recording radio station. It's the model, it's the gold standard in this country. It's a great radio station.
Well, the fact that there's virtually no royalties anymore.
Yeah,
while recording, to have someone come in and maybe pay a couple $100 is a good idea for the artist.
I mean, the groups want to do it, and so that's the other extreme. Okay, and somewhere in between will be a wide variety. Just like there are studios that thrive on not having windows. The concept of the studio is that it's cave-like. I would say Annie's studio is quintessentially the opposite of that. Annie worked for over a year, hundreds of locations, dozens of locations, until she finally found one that was floor-to-ceiling glass for another reason, for another vibe. Okay, but I use Electric Lady and Jungle for obvious reasons because they're in my DNA, and they couldn't be more opposite. But they both get to the same place. They're both world class. They actually both are friends with each other. They both share clients. They both recommend clients, I'm told. I think that's safe to say.
I work at Electric Lady when I can't get in my room.
Exactly, and they couldn't be more different.
Thank God for diversity.
Thank God for exactly. So I think it's all, so that's another cliff note. Yes, sorry.
Over the past 50 years, it seems to me, I wasn't there for a lot of it, what people wanted when they had tubes, when they had tape, was they wanted it cleaner, and then we got solid state, and then we got digital, and then all of a sudden they wanted it more colored. We had live musicians playing, not to a click, then to a click, and then to a grid, and we're quantizing now. And then now new producers are deliberately misaligning the beat from the grid by a few clicks, just so you have a little bit of flam between your kick and your snare and your hi-hat, and it sounds a little bit more human. So I guess my question is, how did that aesthetic change over time? Like, how did you see the artists coming into your studio and wanting it less colored, less colored, less colored, more colored, less human, and how do you see that particular aesthetic changing over the next 50 years? Because you've talked a little bit about that as far as grids, but as just, are there particular aesthetic trends you see just kind of oscillating between peaks and troughs?
I think trends are just like genres of music sometimes, right? You have peaks and valleys in genres of music. There's no rules at the end of the day. artist will loop a 1-bar beat and then on their next song have a whole live drummer. You know, there's really no rules at the end of the day, and I think it's going to be a mix-up and mash-up of you know, trends, and it takes trendsetters to start those trends, and I think a lot of the artists and producers and engineers lead those trends and follow them, and you know.
And a lot of what she's mentioning, I think, is we fail to say is like that the industry is driven by those that actually pay for it. They, like record companies or whoever, distribution, whatever it is, they're paying to get the stuff that's making the money, and they're the ones who either champion the technology or not. I'll mention even like Quad and 5.1 and all that stuff. It didn't really happen because it didn't make a difference in their bottom line from the consumers, so they didn't support it. And so therefore, it's there, but it got used in other different places and so forth. And just to show how they support what they're supporting, you know, guy buys a beat for $30, writes a record about a horse, and he has the biggest record ever on the fucking charts. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now they're trying to get more of that. And I'm definitely the last person to be a whore to the industry. I'm not saying I'm like, oh, I'll do what you say, but I'm just watching it and I'm going, you guys, along the way, every turn as it was, rock and roll used to be God and king to me. I'm a guitar player. I love it. Where are the guitars now? They don't support it. It doesn't make them any money. So that's all I'm saying. So when I think about the future, I go, the future really rests with what they've got to say. Because otherwise, kids are at home in their garage, you know, they're doing what they're doing. They're making records, they're selling product, and they're giving them millions of dollars. Not saying they shouldn't be in the studio. Like, everything we're talking about is actually correct. People love to be in the studio to flap their wings and just be with their boys and do the whole thing. And, you know, it's a ritual. But it's not necessary in order to make dollars, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever side you want to be on that one.
I'm just wondering, from the physical design standpoint, John, are you starting to see people looking for infrastructure to be voice controlled, right? We've got this stuff in our homes now. We're going to dim the lights, do this, that kind of thing. Is that creeping into your world? And then for the panelists, could you see that type of interaction with the equipment actually developing? Talk to the console and it responds to you, right? Or even, you know, now we'll blow our minds. 50 years from now, we could actually think we want to turn up the bass and it turns up. You know, and then if you talk about sharing that with an audience, and people now are getting the opportunity to remix their stems and stuff that the artists put out there. If you could actually listen to a song the way you wanted to, only through your own thoughts and control equipment that way. Anyway, futuristic thing.
The mind piece.
I'll jump in really first. I had an interview yesterday. Actually, Wall Street Journal for quite some time essentially wanted to talk about AI in our industry. Actually, I think all he wanted to do was come to our show because he just wanted to touch our world. Because it is sexy, our world. It's a small world, but it's very influential. For me, I'm not seeing that much of it. I hope we don't see that much of it. I mean, I'm happy that the lights can be changed. I mean, 50 years ago, I needed technology as big as this room to get Jimi so that he could color his room, and now you can go to Home Depot and do the same thing, and that's really cool. And Annie has that in his studio, and that's fine, and that's great. I'm happy that the thermostats are automatic, and we can go down that list. But the idea of talking to a console, I hope that doesn't happen. I'm not seeing it.
Siri, make it funky.
Yeah, Siri, or, you know,
Make it sound better.
yeah, or Siri make a hit, or Siri make the drums go louder. I mean, I'm actually not seeing that. I can't imagine anybody's horribly interested in that. There are some cool things happening in studios, okay? If you think about it, our industry 50 years ago was driven by gear. The people who sold the gear brokered the studio installation business. I can tell you that because I quickly learned that and became friends with them. And that was very helpful. That is clearly not the case. As we watch a shrinking exhibit floor go down to almost nothing, in 2 years it'll be in the Hilton. Not a bad idea. Okay, why? It's not that we don't need equipment. And it's not that we don't love the equipment. Everybody here loves the equipment. Okay? It's just that it's become commoditized. Okay? You can buy it online. It's a tenth the price of what it used to be. So what, but yet there's 10 times more studios than ever before. What's the difference? Great sound and the vibe. Great sound and the vibe. Great sound is much more universal to discuss. I think we could have a whole conversation about it, but I think we could zero in on it pretty quickly. We want our stuff to go from one studio to another pretty smoothly. We want to trust the sound in our studios. That's a whole other conversation, but we can get into that pretty quickly. Vibe, God, I sure hope it's different for every studio. That's the whole point. That's why every song is different. So since I didn't know any difference as a 22-year-old, and I didn't realize that what I was creating was a vibe studio, I just thought that's the way it was supposed to be. Lucky break for me. It never even occurred to me that it was supposed to be boring or utilitarian, or that the artist wasn't supposed to be in the control room. Just a good lucky break, but that's where we've derived, and I think all of us would agree on that. I'm watching some differences, but I'm seeing some common thread. I hope that stuff doesn't creep in. I think it should creep in where it's useful. I want the thermostat to be cool. I want Annie to know if all of a sudden it goes to 100 degrees in her studio and she's sitting in Staten Island. That's really cool. And I want Lee at Electric Lady to know if that pump doesn't go, the goddamn floor floods again. I want him to know that if he's sitting in Las Vegas or something. But I can't imagine anybody wants Siri make the drum beat faster. I mean, what's the point? That's me. Now, if I'm ready to have somebody, I'm not seeing it, but you tell me if you want it. If you want it, I'm going to make it happen. I'm just the plumber. We're just the plumber. Well, we're not just the plumber, but we're the plumber.
I think one of the other common denominators here is that everybody is saying that the human element is something that's not going to change.
Never.
Regardless of whether the human element is used for performance or for collaboration or for beat creation or whatever, the human element is not going to go away, and computers will not make music by themselves for that people will enjoy. Ultimately, it's all human driven.
But robots will enjoy it.
Well,
Job security there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the business of making giant consoles, you need to be nervous. I think so. They've known that for a long time. But if you're in the business of loving music and making music, I think you have job security. I mean, there's more music than ever. Okay, we got one more question.
Philosophical question for the group. After I mentioned that if Billy were to ever re-record Downeaster Alexa, she might pipe up and say, "Yes, Billy." If he said that there, Alexa. Anyway, with virtualization of instruments and players, I work in the Greater Salt Lake market, recording orchestras. And we used to be able to field 3 groups simultaneously on different sessions in different studios, and now we can barely field 1. It's because they're all moving away to where there's work. And in the first-tier markets, I don't think you're probably seeing that as much. To what extent do you think that virtualization of instruments is going to weaken our player base and make it harder to get that vibe in the future as people can just record an orchestra in their project studio?
I think the answer is both.
Yeah. It's just another instrument. And I'll speak for Jimi. We shouldn't be afraid of it. If somebody's happy making a natural drum sound virtually, or taking an automated click track and then making it sound like it was supposed to sound 50 years ago, well, I agree with Jimi. If that's your instrument, that's okay. You get Bob Margoloff up here and he'll tell you that the current instrument for musicians is the laptop. Maybe yes, maybe no. But then you get another person, Jeff Moldar, will tell you it's a 6-string Martin. I don't know.
The journey of recording until it's over is magic.
Yeah.
And excuse me, everybody on this panel, it doesn't actually matter how it happens. If you get to the end,
let's go.
When I was 10 or 12 years old, and I heard Dancing in the Streets for the first time on the radio, on my 5-transistor radio, I just went, man, this shit's for me. Now, I didn't go, hey, there's no bass, what the fuck? It just felt like it spoke to me, and how it was recorded, and what it really sounded like, and the way it was delivered to me, two completely different things. Because it sounded great when they made it, and on my radio, it felt great. So
I think it's okay.
So will we have a player shortage, though, in future years?
I don't know. And with that, so we're going to end with a question. Personal thanks to everybody up here who are longtime colleagues and friends. Honored to be sitting here with them. Thank you. I hope we do. I don't want to be here in 50 years.